Picture this. The humming fluorescent lights of Mike's auto shop cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor as Sarah Morgan stood with her arms crossed, her military posture unwavering despite the growing tension. The invoice in her hand showed a figure nearly triple what she'd been quoted over the phone. The mechanic, a heavy-set man with oil-stained hands and a forced smile, tapped the paper with greasy fingers. "Look, lady, I don't make the rules. That's what it costs to fix a transmission in a foreign car like yours. Take it or leave it." Sarah's jaw tightened. After 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat engineer, she knew the difference between a real, mechanical issue and an invented one. She also knew when someone was trying to take advantage of her. "This is highway robbery, and we both know it," she said quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority that had commanded respect in war zones. "The parts you're charging me for aren't even compatible with my vehicle model." The mechanic, Mike himself, according to his embroidered shirt, leaned back against the counter, his smile fading to something more predatory. "Well, if you know so much about cars, maybe you should fix it yourself. But good luck finding another shop that'll even look at your car today." The small crowd of waiting customers shifted uncomfortably, a few exchanging glances, but nobody speaking up. Mike's eyes flickered with triumph as he saw Sarah weighing her options. She needed her car for work tomorrow. He had her over a barrel, and they both knew it. "Fine," she finally said, pulling out her credit card. "But I want itemized receipts for every part." Mike's smile returned as he swiped her card. "Sure thing, honey. Whatever makes you feel better." What Mike didn't notice was Sarah's other hand, the one holding her phone at her side, recording the entire exchange. What he didn't know was that Sarah Morgan wasn't just any female veteran. She was the newly appointed head of the state's Consumer Protection Division, with a law degree and a team of investigators at her disposal. And what Mike couldn't possibly realize in that moment of smug satisfaction was that his little scheme was about to become the centerpiece of a statewide crackdown on predatory auto repair practices. Little did he know, his entire business model was about to change forever. Let me take you back to where it all began. Sarah Morgan hadn't always planned on a career in consumer protection. Her path had taken her from a small-town honor student to Army combat engineer, where she'd developed an uncanny talent for understanding mechanical systems under the most stressful conditions imaginable. When an IED had cut her second tour short, leaving her with a permanent limp and a Purple Heart, she'd channeled her discipline into law school, graduating at the top of her class, despite working part-time as a mechanic to make ends meet. Her appointment to head the Consumer Protection Division had come just 3 weeks ago, after years of building a reputation as a fierce advocate for veterans' rights. The governor himself had shaken her hand at the ceremony, praising her unique combination of real-world experience and legal expertise. Sarah had accepted the praise with the same quiet modesty that characterized everything she did, nodding once, thanking him sincerely, and immediately getting to work. Her Toyota Camry was her pride and joy, a sensible car she'd maintained meticulously since buying it after law school. She knew every inch of its engine, had changed its oil religiously every 5,000 miles, and could diagnose most issues by sound alone. So when the transmission began making an unusual noise during her commute, she'd quickly identified the likely culprit, a minor issue with the torque converter that would require a simple fix. Being new to the area and overwhelmed with her first month on the job, she'd reluctantly decided to take it to a professional rather than fixing it herself. A quick online search had led her to Mike's auto shop, which boasted 5-star reviews and claimed to offer honest service at fair prices. She'd called ahead, described the symptoms precisely, and been quoted a reasonable $400 for parts and labor. The morning she'd dropped off her car, Sarah had noticed the tidy suburban shop with its blue and white sign promising, "We treat every customer like family." The waiting area had been clean, with fresh coffee brewing and magazines neatly arranged. On side tables, several other customers, mostly men, sat scrolling through their phones or reading newspapers. She'd noticed one elderly woman clutching her purse nervously as she waited. Mike himself had greeted Sarah at the counter, his handshake firm as he'd taken her keys. She'd explained the issue again, using the proper terminology and mentioning her background in mechanical engineering. She'd noticed how his expression had shifted almost imperceptibly, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a tightening of his smile. "Don't worry about a thing," he'd said, waving away her explanation. "We'll do a full diagnostic and call you with the results." As she'd left to catch her Uber to work, Sarah had glanced back through the large windows to see Mike watching her departure, turning her keys over thoughtfully in his hand. Something about his expression had given her pause, a calculating look that seemed out of place on someone whose reputation depended on trust. The call had come just after lunch. The news wasn't good, Mike had explained in a grave tone. The transmission was severely damaged. It would need a complete rebuild. Parts and labor would run about $3,800, and that was giving her their special discount. When Sarah had questioned this assessment, expressing surprise given the symptoms, Mike had launched into a detailed explanation filled with technical jargon, some of which, Sarah noted with growing suspicion, didn't quite make sense for her model of car. "I really recommend we get started right away," Mike had concluded. "These things can go from bad to worse real quick. Wouldn't want you stranded on the highway." Sarah had asked for time to think, promising to call back within the hour. Instead, she'd pulled up the shop's reviews again, this time sorting by lowest rating first. Buried beneath the 5-star praise were a handful of 1-star complaints, all with a similar pattern: initial low quotes followed by dramatic price increases, unnecessary repairs, and condescending treatment, particularly toward women and elderly customers. By the time Sarah arrived back at the shop after work, she'd activated the voice recorder on her phone and slipped it into her jacket pocket. "I understand there's an issue with my transmission," she said calmly, as Mike approached. And that's when their confrontation had begun. The one where Mike had presented her with the $3,800 invoice and treated her concerns with dismissive confidence. The one that would prove to be a turning point for both of them. The next morning, Sarah's hands gripped her steering wheel tightly as she drove to work, the repaired car running perfectly despite Mike's insistence that the entire transmission needed rebuilding. She'd paid the exorbitant sum, $200 for what should have been a $400 repair, but she wasn't defeated. Far from it. At a red light, she replayed the conversation in her mind. "These parts aren't even necessary for the repair," she'd pointed out, indicating several items on the invoice. Mike had shrugged. "Better safe than sorry. Once we got in there, we found all kinds of problems. You should be thanking me for catching them before they left you stranded." When Sarah had requested the old parts, a standard practice to verify repairs, Mike had claimed they'd already been disposed of. When she'd asked to see the diagnostic readout, he'd tapped his temple. "Got it all up here, honey. 20 years of experience beats any computer." The light turned green, and Sarah accelerated, her mind shifting gears as quickly as her car. She'd been in this position before, facing an adversary who underestimated her, who saw her gender first and her capabilities never. As a woman in the military, as a veteran in law school, as a newcomer in government. The tactics were always the same: dismissal, condescension, technobabble meant to confuse and intimidate. But Sarah had long ago learned to transform such treatment into fuel for action rather than paralysis. By the time she reached her office, she had the beginnings of a plan. Her assistant greeted her with a stack of files and meeting reminders. But Sarah had a new priority. "Jason, I need you to pull every consumer complaint against auto repair shops in the county for the past 5 years. Sort them by business, then by complaint type, and get me contact information for the Better Business Bureau, the Attorney General's Consumer Division, and the local news consumer watchdog." Jason raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Should I assume this is related to your car troubles yesterday?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Let's just say I had an illuminating consumer experience. Also, clear my lunch hour. I need to make a few calls." By mid-morning, the pattern was clear. Mike's auto shop had received 37 complaints in 5 years. Not enough to raise major red flags in an overworked system, but enough to establish a pattern when viewed collectively. The victims were predominantly women, 68%, and elderly customers, 22%, with complaints centered around unnecessary repairs and price gouging. Sarah's first call was to her former commanding officer, now retired and working for the State Department of Transportation. "Colonel Reynolds, it's Morgan. I need a favor. Information on state inspection certifications for auto shops, particularly any borderline cases or previous violations." Her second call was to the head of the local community college's automotive technology program. "Professor Jenkins, we haven't met, but I need an expert opinion on some repair practices." By lunchtime, she had confirmation that Mike's auto shop had been flagged twice for inspection irregularities, but had managed to correct them before any action was taken. She also learned that Mike himself had been the subject of 3 complaints to the ASE Certification Board for ethics violations, all of which had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. As she hung up from her final call to a former classmate now working as a producer at the local news station, Sarah's office phone rang. "Ms. Morgan, there's a Ms. Eleanor Winters on line 1. Says she saw you at Mike's auto shop yesterday and wanted to speak with you urgently." Sarah picked up the phone. "This is Sarah Morgan." The voice on the other end was elderly, but sharp. "I saw what happened yesterday. The way that man spoke to you. I've been going to him for years because he's the only shop within walking distance of my home. He's been charging me $95 for an oil change because I have a European model. A Volkswagen Jetta from 2010. My grandson visited last month and told me I was being robbed blind, but I didn't know what to do. When I saw you stand up to him, well, I looked you up. Consumer Protection Division? I thought maybe. Ms. Winters, I'm very glad you called. Would you be willing to make an official statement about your experiences with Mike's Auto Shop? By the end of the week, Sarah had statements from 12 former customers and had quietly opened an official investigation. The next step required patience, gathering evidence of ongoing violations, but she didn't have to wait long. The following Tuesday, her office phone rang again. It was Mike's Auto Shop. Ms. Morgan, this is Toby from Mike's. Your car is due for its follow-up inspection after the transmission work. It's a standard procedure, totally free of charge. We just need to make sure everything's running smoothly. Sarah knew there was no such thing as a standard follow-up inspection for transmission work. This was Mike fishing for more business. I'll bring it in Thursday morning, she said. Thank you for the reminder. Before Thursday arrived, Sarah had prepared carefully. She'd had her car thoroughly inspected by Professor Jenkins at the community college, documenting its perfect condition with photographs and diagnostic readings. She'd installed a small, legal recording device under the dashboard, and she'd arranged for Ms. Winters to bring her car in for an oil change at the same time. When Thursday morning arrived, Sarah arrived at Mike's wearing casual clothes rather than her usual professional attire. She handed over her keys with a smile. Just the follow-up, right? I should be able to wait? Mike himself took the keys, his own smile broad and confident. Absolutely. Shouldn't take more than 45 minutes. Coffee's fresh if you want some. Sarah took a seat in the waiting area just as Eleanor Winters arrived, giving the older woman a subtle nod of recognition. For the next half hour, she pretended to work on her laptop while actually monitoring the small camera she'd placed in her car, the feed visible in a corner of her screen. She watched as Mike's mechanics performed a cursory check of her transmission, then began examining unrelated systems. She saw Mike himself arrive, pointing to various components and shaking his head. She heard fragments of their conversation through the recording device. Perfect opportunity. Probably doesn't even know what a spark plug looks like. Same as the old lady with the Jetta. 40 minutes later, Mike emerged from the garage with a concerned expression that Sarah now recognized as entirely theatrical. Ms. Morgan, I'm afraid we found some issues that need immediate attention. Sarah closed her laptop. Oh? What kind of issues? Mike launched into a detailed explanation involving her fuel injection system, brake pads, and something ominously described as imminent catastrophic belt failure. The estimated cost for these urgent repairs, $2,700. Sarah feigned distress. But I just spent $200 last week. How could all these other problems not have been noticed then? Mike's expression was a masterpiece of practiced concern. Sometimes one problem masks others. It's actually quite common. But don't worry, since you're a return customer, I can knock off 10%. Sarah hesitated, then sighed. I suppose you'd better do the work. I can't risk breaking down. Mike patted her shoulder. Smart decision. We'll get started right away. Should be ready by closing time. As he walked back to the garage, Sarah reopened her laptop and sent a single email with video attachments. The subject line read simply, Operation Consumer Protection, green light. That afternoon, as Sarah returned to pick up her car, she wasn't alone. Professor Jenkins from the community college accompanied her, along with 2 investigators from her office and a reporter from the local news station's consumer watchdog team. Mike's smile froze as they entered, his eyes darting between Sarah and her companions. Your car's all set, he said quickly. Running good as new. Sarah nodded. I'm sure it is. But before I pay, I'd like you to explain these urgent repairs to my colleague here. He's a master mechanic and automotive technology professor. Mike's face paled slightly. Well, the technical details are pretty complex. Professor Jenkins stepped forward. I'm particularly interested in the catastrophic belt failure you diagnosed. Perhaps you could show me the worn belt you replaced. And I'd like to see the brake pads, added one of the investigators, flashing his Consumer Protection Division badge. For the official record, Mike's composure cracked. Look, there might have been a misunderstanding about the urgency of some of these repairs. A misunderstanding, Sarah repeated. Like the misunderstanding last week when you charged me $200 for a simple torque converter adjustment? Or the misunderstanding where you've been charging Ms. Winters here $95 for conventional oil changes on her Volkswagen? Mike's eyes widened as he recognized Eleanor Winters standing quietly by the door. The elderly woman gave him a small, satisfied wave. This is ridiculous, Mike blustered. You can't just come in here and accuse me of fraud, deceptive trade practices, violation of state consumer protection statutes. Sarah stepped closer. Actually, as head of the state's Consumer Protection Division, that's exactly what I can do. Especially when I have video evidence of you instructing your employees to invent problems with my vehicle. Now, I think it's time we discuss the actual condition of my car and what, if anything, you've done to it today. The news camera captured everything. Mike's stammering explanations, the mechanic's reluctant admission that no actual work had been performed despite the invoice charging for parts and labor, Professor Jenkins's expert assessment that the car had been in perfect condition all along. As the story unfolded, other customers in the waiting area began to murmur, several stepping forward with their own experiences. One man had been charged for a new catalytic converter that, it turned out, had never been replaced. A young woman had paid for a transmission flush that had never been performed. Mike's face grew increasingly red as he realized the depth of his predicament. "This is entrapment," he finally shouted. "You set me up." Sarah shook her head. "No, Mike, this is accountability. You set yourself up by building a business model on exploitation and dishonesty." Within an hour, investigators were combing through Mike's records, computer systems, and parts inventory. The evidence was damning. Systematic overcharging, parts billed but never installed, unnecessary repairs performed on perfectly functioning vehicles. The pattern disproportionately targeted women, the elderly, and those who demonstrated limited automotive knowledge. As Sarah prepared to leave, Mike approached her, his arrogance replaced by desperate anger. "You've ruined me," he hissed. "Years of building this business, destroyed in a single day." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "You ruined yourself, Mike, one honest customer at a time." The story broke on the evening news, featuring interviews with multiple victims and experts, explaining how consumers could protect themselves from similar scams. By morning, it had been picked up by national outlets, framed as a David versus Goliath tale, with Sarah cast as the veteran-turned-consumer champion who had exposed corruption using her unique combination of military discipline, mechanical expertise, and legal authority. Social media exploded with similar stories. The hashtag #Don'tMikeMeOver began trending as people shared their own experiences with dishonest mechanics. Mike's Auto Shop's Yelp page was flooded with new reviews as previous. Customers reconsidered their experiences in light of the revelations. Mike attempted damage control, releasing a statement claiming that any dishonest practices had been the work of rogue employees without his knowledge. This strategy backfired spectacularly when 3 former employees came forward with evidence that they had been trained and incentivized to find problems that didn't exist, particularly with female customers. Within 2 weeks, the Attorney General's office had filed formal charges against Mike and his business for consumer fraud, false advertising, and deceptive trade practices. The Automotive Certification Board suspended his shop's credentials pending a full investigation, and the local community college announced a new program, funded partly by settlement money from similar cases, offering free basic car maintenance classes designed specifically for vulnerable consumers. For Sarah, the case represented more than just a professional victory. It was personal vindication, proof that the skills she'd developed throughout her life could be wielded not just on battlefields or in courtrooms, but in everyday situations where power imbalances left ordinary people vulnerable. In the months that followed, her office saw a 300% increase in consumer complaints across all industries, as people felt empowered to speak up about their experiences. Sarah developed a streamlined system for handling these complaints, prioritizing cases that revealed systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations. Mike's Auto Shop closed its doors permanently after the state revoked its business license. Mike himself, facing mounting legal bills and potential criminal charges, accepted a plea deal that included financial restitution to victims, community service hours teaching honest repair practices at the very community college that had helped expose him, and a 5-year ban from the automotive repair industry. The shop's location didn't stay vacant long. 3 months after the scandal, it reopened under new management, a cooperative owned by 2 of Mike's former mechanics who had blown the whistle on his practices, along with Professor Jenkins from the community college. Their business model emphasized transparency, education, and fair pricing. They named it Honest Engine Auto Repair and adopted the slogan, "We fix cars, not prices." Sarah was invited to the grand opening, where she cut the ribbon and received a standing ovation from the crowd of local residents. Many were former victims of Mike's schemes, now cautiously optimistic about having a trustworthy repair option in their neighborhood. "This isn't just about cars," Sarah told the gathered community. "It's about the fundamental fairness we all deserve in our daily transactions. It's about recognizing that expertise shouldn't be used as a weapon to exploit others, but as a tool to empower them. Eleanor Winters, standing in the front row with tears in her eyes, clasped Sarah's hand afterward. "You didn't just fix the problem," she said. "You made sure it couldn't happen again. That's real justice." 1 year later, Sarah Morgan stood at a podium accepting the Governor's Award for Public Service Excellence. The citation read, "For exceptional commitment to protecting consumers and creating lasting systemic change." The auto repair industry in the state had undergone a transformation. New regulations required transparent pricing, return of replaced parts, and detailed documentation of all diagnostic tests. A consumer education campaign had reached over 1 million residents with information about their rights when dealing with repair services of all kinds. Honest Engine Auto Repair had expanded to 3 locations, each operating on the same principles of transparency and education. They had instituted a popular Watch Your Repair program, where customers could observe the work being done on their vehicle, asking questions and learning basic maintenance skills in the process. As for Mike, rumors circulated that he had moved to a neighboring state and attempted to open another shop, only to find that his reputation had preceded him. His online review history followed him like a shadow, warning potential customers away. Last Sarah had heard, he was working as an employee at a national chain, under close supervision and without authority to diagnose or price repairs. Sarah's office wall now displayed a framed invoice from her original visit to Mike's auto shop, a reminder of the case that had defined the early days of her tenure. Beside it hung a photograph of Honest Engine's grand opening, with Eleanor Winters beaming in the front row. The experience had taught Sarah something profound about justice, that it wasn't always found in courtrooms or legislative chambers, but sometimes in the most ordinary interactions, at a repair shop counter, in a waiting room, or wherever people found themselves vulnerable to those with more power, knowledge, or authority. Her new initiative, a statewide consumer education program targeting high schools, community centers, and retirement communities, grew directly from this insight. "Knowledge is the most effective consumer protection," she often said in her presentations, "and it's the one that can never be taken away from you." On quiet evenings, Sarah sometimes took her Toyota for a drive along the coastal highway, windows down, enjoying the smooth purr of its perfectly functioning engine. The car had become something of a local celebrity, recognized by people who would wave or honk as she passed. She always waved back, appreciating the unexpected community that had formed around a simple story of standing up against exploitation. The small purple heart medallion hanging from her rearview mirror, a gift from her former unit, caught the sunset light as she drove, reminding her that courage took many forms. Sometimes it meant facing enemy fire in a distant desert, sometimes it meant facing down a dishonest mechanic in a suburban garage, and sometimes it meant helping others find the courage to speak up when they'd been wronged. The battle for consumer justice would never be completely won. There would always be new schemes, new vulnerabilities, new Mikes. But for every scheme, there were people willing to stand against it. For every vulnerability, there was potential. For education and empowerment, and for every Mike, there were those who refused to be intimidated or exploited. Sarah Morgan, veteran, lawyer, and consumer advocate, drove on into the gathering dusk, already thinking about tomorrow's battles and the lives they might change. Have you ever stood up to someone who tried to take advantage of you? Share your story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale of justice served, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life revenge stories every week. Remember, knowledge is power, especially when someone's trying to pull a fast one on you.